Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you are struggling to get the results that you want with your loose watercolor painting, I have 10 tips that just may help you out. Now these tips are also appropriate for acrylics too. It doesn't matter, it's just the loose style that these 10 tips can help with. Now when you watch someone paint in a loose style, you may think to yourself, well, that looks pretty easy. Well, it wasn't for me. And I found that these 10 tips really helped me through that learning process. And I hope they'll help you too. I talk a lot about resisting the urge to use small strokes and details and things like that. Well, keep in mind, I'm not saying that small strokes and small details are not appropriate for loose watercolors, because they absolutely are. Sometimes they really make the painting. What we're talking about today is more general, the general way that you can achieve a loose look. So let's get started. Number 1, turn on the music. Painting in a loose style requires a certain level of relaxation. So for me, the best way to relax is by turning on some music. Whenever I would tell myself to relax, well, that would never happen. But if I turn on music that I really like, then I think about the music and I naturally go into a flow state. So the whole purpose here is to make your strokes more fluid, and music usually helps with that. Number 2, study your reference, whether it's a photo or an actual object. Study that object, get to know it. What are the things about that flower or whatever it happens to be that attract you to it? What are the elements that you want to convey to your viewer? You don't have to include everything. This is not a realistic photo, so just pick out the essence of what attracts you to that object. Don't overthink it. Keep it simple. Number 3, don't sketch it out. Now, a lot of people are going to disagree with me on this, but for loose watercolors, you really want to embrace a more intuitive way of painting. And when I sketch something out, that automatically makes me more uptight and want to include a lot of detail. So don't sketch it out, just embrace the freedom of loose watercolor painting. Number 4, practice before you actually begin. So I like to take an unusual approach in that my whole goal is to paint more loosely. I tend to want to paint more tightly, so I will automatically sit down and paint extremely loose as I can get it right in the beginning. And then I can practice a couple of more times and tighten it up just a little bit. That's just the method that works for me. I like to get to that extreme boundary immediately. And then I have fewer practices in between before I get into the groove of where I want to be for my actual painting. So give it a try, but always warm up first. Number 5, use a high quality paper. So high quality paper would be 100% cotton. Now, 100% cotton is more expensive because it is a better quality, so there's a little bit of a trade-off. You kind of have to decide, when do you feel okay with using the more expensive paper? Now, the wonderful thing about 100% cotton paper is the way that it absorbs the water and the pigment. It tends to make a smoother, creamier, more painterly merging of all those colors, and it's a little more resistant to hard lines or water blooms. You know, it's just a nicer way that it absorbs the paint and the water. Now, a cheaper brand will have wood pulp usually, as opposed to cotton, and it can have a combination depending on the brand of what their percentage split would be between the wood pulp and the cotton. And you just have to play around with it and find one that you like. I particularly don't want to use high quality paper because it's more expensive for my everyday practicing. That kind of hinders my freedom. So I will use a less expensive paper to, you know, play around with. And then when it ends up in the trash, I don't feel so guilty about it, and I don't feel like I'm wasting my resources. So, you know, just play around with it. I'll put some links down below to different papers, but just know that 100% cotton is the best quality that you can get. And when you're practicing, if you're not on 100% cotton, just keep in mind that if you're unhappy with your results, part of it could be your paper. So you may want to try some different papers, and definitely practice a couple of times on something that's 100% cotton so that you can see the difference, and then you can identify what are the things that you don't like about your painting that are truly your skill level or your practices versus the paper, because you don't want to take the blame for something that is caused by the paper. So just try different ones and see what you think. Also, with the paper, you'll want to use cold pressed. Hot pressed dries very fast, and it does not allow you enough time typically to work with the pigment. And I've just found it's very frustrating if you're going for a loose style where you're going to be using lots of water. If you're on hot pressed, that water is just going to evaporate and dry out so fast. So use cold pressed paper for loose watercolors, and that will allow you plenty of time to work with your colors, and I think you'll be happier. Number 6, use a large, thirsty brush. Now, by large, I don't mean jumbo size immediately. Usually my rule of thumb is to go up a size or 2 than what I would typically think that I would need. And this just helps me keep control over going too fine line with my strokes. In loose watercolors, you really want large, long, juicy strokes. So by going up a size or 2, it just kind of helps you achieve that. You want a thirsty brush because you really want a lot of water and pigment in your loose watercolors. And if you're not using a thirsty brush, then you're constantly having to go back to your water and try to get more water and pigment onto your paper. And that's just frustrating, to keep dipping back in your water over and over again and trying to get the right consistency. So use something like a quill brush, or also known as a mop brush. A lot of the silver brushes are really good with this. Just test them out, and you'll want one that typically will have a larger belly, will hold more water and pigment than one that does not have a large belly. Number 7, paint with as few strokes as possible. This can be pretty challenging depending on what you're painting. Roses, for instance, are very difficult to paint with just a few strokes because there are so many petals. But if you just keep that in the back of your mind, that you want to resist that urge to fiddle with it and keep doing small, tiny strokes, you'll be much happier with large, lots of water pigment strokes. That's how you achieve the loose look. Number 8, no finger painting. Now, what I mean by this, all those little tiny strokes that you tend to make when you're fiddling around with your painting, trying to get everything the way you want it, and then you'll do these little tiny strokes. So try to avoid using your fingers to do little tiny marks, unless you are specifically going for some detail work. But in your loose painting, you don't want to use your fingers. This brings me to number 9. Hold your paintbrush higher up on the handle. When you hold your paintbrush, lower right here, you tend to use it like a pencil to do lots of fine detail work. And loose watercolors really want longer strokes, very fluid motions, and you can achieve that by holding it higher. So when you're using a smaller brush, or you're painting details, or you're painting a small painting, of course you're going to hold it like this, and you're going to use your fingers a lot. Then as you move up in the size of painting that you're working with, you're going to use different parts of your arm. So let's say something like an 8.5 by 11, you will start using more of your hand. Then when you get up to something like 11 by 14, you're going to use more of your elbow. Then when you go even larger than that, and especially all the way up to a mural, your shoulders are going to come into play a lot more, so you'll have more of this motion. So by holding your brush higher on the handle, you are encouraging more movement in your strokes, regardless of the size of painting that you're painting. So even with 8.5 by 11, sometimes even with 5 by 7, I still hold my brush higher on the handle. It just opens up my motions. And number 10, stand up. So many times I find myself crouching over my painting, and that makes everything tighten up. I tend to crouch, I hold my brush wrong, so when you stand up, hold your brush by the end, you are extending your arm out when you stand up to reach your painting, and that will open up your painting so much. That's such a simple trick. So there are my 10 tips for mastering loose watercolors. I hope this was helpful for you. Please give them a try and let me know how it goes for you. If you enjoyed this one, give me a thumbs up. Please subscribe to help my channel grow, and also hit that bell so that you can be notified as soon as I post a new video. Thanks so much.